All right, Shabbat Shalom and welcome to United Israel World Union. This is our Sabbath morning scripture study. Thank you so much for joining us. It is a pleasure to be here with you today to share a message from the biblical text. I did want to start off this morning and ask you to keep the Tyler clan in your prayers. Last night, Anna Santoro Tyler, Ann, the mother of David and Stephen Tyler, mother-in-law of Patty, passed away, and so we want to hold them up in our prayers. I thought about this morning, and also Jeremy. I also know Dave and Patty's son, so keep the whole Tyler family in your prayers. There is one beautiful image that I think about whenever someone passes away, and that is the biblical image of being gathered to your people. So anyway, keep them in your thoughts and prayers. And Ann is this morning gathered to her people. So please lift up the Tylers. I did want to give a couple of other announcements before we get into the teaching today. Remember, we have a Sukkot gathering here in St. Francisville, October the 18th through the 20th. We are inviting you. There is no charge to attend the conference. Obviously, you would have to find a place to stay, but we have hotels in and around the area. So we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that in the dialogue today. But if you can attend, all we ask is that you register, because the local group, we're already making some finalized plans. We're talking about meal plans and so forth. So we really need to get a pretty accurate count. I mean, 55 to 65 is not a big deal, but 55 to 135 is a big deal. So if you're coming and you're bringing a bus full of people, and you probably should do that, just let us know so that we can plan accordingly. A couple of other things. I will let you know that the Tabor tour is about to close the doors. This isn't a hype to try to get people to join in. We did that months ago. We have well over 30 people have already signed up and secured a place on the bus. James is the perfect teacher. He understands, hey, I want this many people in a classroom setting. So he's fairly satisfied that 33 is the perfect number. I want to put as many people on the bus as can find a seat. So he'll work with me on that, but we're literally down to just the last few that could possibly sign up. I'd say less than 10 people can still sign up. While I'm talking about Israel, 5 weeks from today, I will be en route to Israel to spend some time. I have the Tanakh tour. I'm going to go with Jono Vandor and Tovia Singer. We have maybe a couple of spots left on that, but you'd have to act pretty quick for that one. One other piece of news about Israel tours before I get into the class. I have officially set up now for October 19 to 29, 2020, what I'm calling, for lack of a better way to put it, a limited mobility tour. And that's for anyone who wants, one option is someone who just doesn't want the fast pace, lots of walking, like most of our tours have. Another time, we're also going to have it equipped for people with disabilities, someone in a wheelchair, someone with a walker. If you've ever wanted to go to Israel, but you just felt like you couldn't do it because of the physical demands, this is the tour for you. I've carefully worked with Hanok Young and the people at Blossoming Rose. That tour is set up. First day it was posted, we had 3 sign up. So I think I'm pretty confident that one's going to be a go-to. So that's end of October 2020. So lots of opportunities to go to Israel. If you can do that, I encourage you to look into those things. Okay, we are in the Joseph Saga. Anciently, they called a preacher a Magid. A Magid is someone who tells a story. And I've got a story to tell. The interesting thing about the story that I'm working through last week, this week, and possibly over the next several weeks, it's very interesting because the story not only has to do with ancient matters, but it also gives us hints, clues, allusions to things which are yet to come. I believe that we've made the point, and I'll continue to stress the point, that those things which happened before in the time of the patriarchs, especially in relation to our study, our present study of the tribes of Israel, not only do they have ancient application, but they point to things which are coming. So in order to understand what is to come, one must be familiar with that which has been. Ecclesiastes 1:9, we've talked about this idea. Now, the story of Joseph is probably the greatest and most cherished in all of historical literature. These stories have been loved by countless souls throughout time, across the ages, regardless of religious association, Christians, Jews, other. The story is sometimes referred to as a novella. It's like set apart. Genesis 37 through 50 really has some incredible stories. Joseph is the central character. It's almost, when I read this story, it's almost as if the ancient writer is applying a template when writing these stories. I'll give you an example. When you think about the story of Yosef, the story of Joseph, like so many other, the plan of God is precariously on the verge of ruin. If Joseph disappears, if he truly dies, the plan is over, because you're given a dual picture. You're shown what is happening in Joseph's life, and you're shown behind the scenes the working, the guiding of the good hand of Jehovah in the events being orchestrated on the earth. You have various elements that show up in this story that show up in many, many stories, not only in biblical literature, but in our everyday life. There's sibling rivalry. All of us who have siblings know the story in a very real way of sibling rivalry. In the biblical accounts, it goes back to Gan Eden, to the Garden of Eden, where Cain and Abel are the first two. And there's a sibling rivalry there. Once again, the continuity of the text is threatened when Cain kills Abel. And so too is the story of Joseph and his brothers. His brothers want to do away with him. He's the favored. He's daddy's favorite. And he doesn't hide the fact. I think neither of them hide the fact. The father doesn't hide the fact. Jacob doesn't hide the fact that Joseph is his favored son of his favored wife. We've seen the conflict in the text where the brothers, particularly the sons of the handmaidens, Joseph tells on them. He's out in the field with them and he brings a bad report, so they're mad at him. He has visions and dreams and shares them with his brothers. When he got his new coat of many colors, he couldn't wait to show his brothers. Look what Dad made me. So we have this tension building in the story. The brothers see him coming. We covered a little bit about from this last week, but I'm going to give a little bit of a narrative flow as I do the role of Magi, the storyteller. I'll recap a little bit last week to bring us into today's teaching. When Joseph is approaching, the boys see him coming and they say, "Behold, the dreamer comes." They call him the Lord of the dreams. And they decide to kill him. Developing a plot They say, let's kill him and see what happens to his dreams then. The two brothers of the 12 stand up to defend and come up with alternative plans to save the young man's life. One is Reuven. Reuven is on the outs with his father. He has committed a grievous offense against his dad. And I believe, just from being intimate with the characters in the story and reading the story so many times, at least my understanding is that Reuven wants badly to get back into good graces with his father. The other brother who comes up with an alternative plan is Judah. And Judah also steps up and provides a plan. As the narrative unfolds, we learn that there is a master plan working, being guided by the hand of Jehovah behind the scenes. Details in our story that seem to be somewhat random or unrelated or unguided are actually part of the plan. So the boy who dreamed, the Lord of the dreams, carried in his sleep time a vision of something that God was working behind the scenes, a fantastic plan, if you will, that ultimately it was a series of events only revealed to him and those to whom he shared it. But it is a series of events that ultimately will bring salvation. Now, I would put it this way. Joseph was chosen for a key role in the redemption of his family. Or I probably should say it this way. Joseph is chosen for a key role in the redemption of his family. Yes, he was. Yes, he is. Now, Joseph's grandfather, actually Joseph's great-grandfather, had been told of a very dark period that his seed would have to endure. And I want to read that to you this morning. If you'll go with me to Genesis chapter 15, Genesis chapter 15, and I have swapped up on you again. I'm spending more and more time in the JPS. Again, not that I particularly like the translation. It's not as literal as I like. It's more flowing, but where I need to, I'll reference the Hebrew. So in Genesis chapter 15, beginning in verse 13, and he said to Avram, this is Jehovah, know well that your offspring shall be strangers in a land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will execute judgment on the nation they shall serve, and in the end they shall go free with great wealth. And as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a ripe old age. And they shall return here in the fourth generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full or complete. So Avram, now recall that when this is communicated to Avram, he doesn't even have children. But he's told by Jehovah, because he's God's friend. He is the beloved of God. Ohev is the root word. Ahav is one who is loved. And he's told by the one who loves Avram, tells him, your descendants will be enslaved for a long period of time. But they'll come back, and they'll come back with wealth. Now, how might this plan manifest? It's going to manifest in the life of Joseph. It is through Joseph that the plan takes root. It's because of the life of Joseph, because of the Joseph saga, that Israel ends up in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, in a land not theirs, and it is there that they will become a Goy Gadol, a great nation. So the promises to Abraham have been passed to Isaac and to Jacob and to the children, but in particular, Joseph is singled out as the one to and through whom the plan will become manifest and ultimate redemption will be brought to the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph, the favored son of the favored wife, is stolen away in Genesis chapter 40 and verse 15. That phrase is used in a sense, he's kidnapped. Remember, the brothers throw him in a pit. They ultimately decide that they don't have to kill him. They can just act like they killed him. And instead of killing him, they hand him to a band in a caravan who carry him into Egypt. Now, one of the things that I'm doing in my study time is I'm studying ancient routes through the desert region. And I worked through a book called The Sinai Journeys by Har-El, and he covers this extensively. And I'm currently working through David Roll's book on the Exodus, myth or history, or I don't remember the exact title. But in other words, we know the route. We know that where the caravan picks him up in Dothan in the Jezreel Valley, and he is going to be carried along a very ancient route. He's going to go into the land of Egypt. Meanwhile, his coat of many colors, or his kotnot pasim, coat of many colors, or long sleeve coat, or however you want to. I believe that coat of many colors is so well imagined in the minds of thousands. I'll just use that. I love that image anyway. But the boys take the coat, they dip it in blood, and they use the coat dipped in blood to deceive Jacob, their father. I pointed out last week that if you recall, Jacob earlier in life had used a garment to deceive his father. And now it's the old you reap what you sow in some people's mind. That now, in his old age, his boys will now use a similar deception to create in his mind the horrid idea that his favored son is dead. Joseph is believed to be dead, and the father, Jacob, is inconsolable. It says that he was so grief-stricken that when he receives the news and he recognizes the garment as Joseph's, he says, "I'll go to my grave in sorrow." Inconsolable. Now I'm going to take a pause from the flow of the narrative, and I want to call this a prophetic pause. I want to jump into the prophets, and I want you to think about the inconsolable Jacob weeping over Joseph. And even though I touched on this last week, go with me to Jeremiah, to the prophet Jeremiah. This is a prophetic pause. Jeremiah chapter 31 and verse 15. And by the way, this is separated off by white spaces. Thus says Jehovah, a cry is heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter weeping. Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children who are gone. And I believe that just as Joseph was, so are his descendants today. They're believed to be gone. They're believed by some believe that they'll never come back. It's hopelessly lost. In effect, they're dead and gone and forgotten. Evidence would suggest that. There seems to be no proof of Joseph's existence. He's thought to be dead. Joseph, in the text of the Torah story, 4 times is referred to as is not. Yosef enenu. Joseph is not. But he is. He's thought to be not. Look at the next verse, verse 15. Also set off by white space in verse 16, Thus says Jehovah, restrain your voice from weeping, your eyes from shedding tears. For there is a reward for your labor, declares Jehovah. They shall return from the enemy's land. There is hope for your future, declares Jehovah. Your children shall return to their country. Rachel is weeping inconsolably. This one weeping inconsolably is only mentioned twice in all the Hebrew scriptures. Once it is Rachel, once it is Jacob. In both cases, the weeping that is inconsolable is over Yosef. Rachel weeping for her children or for her sons, literally, her sons are represented by Joseph. You say, well, Joseph and Benjamin. Well, let me let you in on something where it says that final reference to refuses to be comforted for her children who are gone or who is not. Literally in the Hebrew, it says, weeping for her son, singular. Who is her son in reference here? None other than Yosef. Rachel is weeping for Joseph. Jacob is weeping for Joseph. Both believe him to be hopelessly lost and gone forever, but he's not dead. Just as in the Joseph saga that we're talking about, just as the historical narrative is put forward, so too in the present day and described in detail among the prophetic writings, Joseph is not dead. Od Yosef chai, yet Joseph lives. He's only thought to be gone. Well, he's gone from the land. He was stolen away from the land, but he's very much alive and being used and will be used to bring life to the children of Israel. And the sooner that the descendants of Joseph wake up and recognize that their role is a key role, the sooner Joseph will stop trying to be someone he is not. And I intended that wordplay. Back to our story. Yosef is sold into Egypt to a person by the name of Potiphar. Potiphar is he's referred to as the Tsar, the prince of the guards. And that's where chapter 37 ends. He's sold into, traded, carried by caravan into the land of Egypt. Potiphar buys him. The boys, meanwhile, run to the father and say, he's dead. Then our story is strangely interrupted. Very odd. Chapter 38 of Genesis seems out of place. We leave the story of Joseph. There's no mention of Joseph. Chapter 38 is all about Judah. And it's a strange story. Judah, we're told, marries a Canaanite woman. And through the Canaanite woman, he has 3 sons. And the first son marries a woman by the name of Tamar. Tamar, his wife, and the first son dies. And it even says in the text that he did things that were displeasing to Jehovah, and Jehovah took his life. Judah, following what will later be recorded as a Torah, a piece of instruction, but at the time we have no evidence of the writing, but it's a levirate marriage where when a man dies not having children, the brother would marry the woman and raise up seed instead for his brother's name. And the second son realizes that the children born through himself and Tamar will not technically be his. He does something which is also displeasing. He too dies. Judah now is faced with a dilemma. This woman has married 2 of his sons, both of which have died, and he doesn't want to give the third, and I don't blame him. This is what some might refer to as a black widow. This is you know this phrase. It's like everyone who marries this woman doesn't make it. So he tells her to remain a widow until the third son is of age, but he's really just not, he's wanting to stall. And so the boy reaches the age and he doesn't give her the third son. So one day in Genesis 38, we read that Judah, whose wife, the Canaanite wife, has now died, he's going through a village and he sees a woman who's dressed as a harlot. And he goes into her and he sleeps with her. He doesn't know that the woman that he sleeps with is actually Tamar. This story is high drama. It's better than anything you've seen on television, I assure you. Think about the twist in the narrative. He impregnates his former daughter-in-law, and she says before he leaves, I need some payment. He said, I tell you what, I'll give you my seal, my cord, and my staff, and I'll send payment later and retrieve my things. You know the story. I like to put in here, there is an interesting passage later in Genesis about the staff departing from Judah, a scepter departing from Judah. And although the Hebrew words are different, I find an interesting correlation. So he gives up the staff, and you know how the story plays out. He ultimately realizes when he sends the payment and they say there's no woman here who is a prostitute, and they find out that it was his daughter-in-law, he reacts very strongly and says she should be killed. Whoever did this, and she, well, I'll tell you who did this, whoever owns this stuff here. And it's his stuff. And so ultimately, he recognizes his failure in many regards. Now, out of this tragic story of the loss of Judah's sons, the character of Judah is developed in a very interesting way. Because Judah's loss of children, as tragic as that is, and some of you who've lost children might be able to relate in some way to Judah's suffering. Judah's suffering will play an instrumental part in the redemption of Israel, anciently in this narrative as well as in the present day. And we pick right back up with Joseph. Now I want to show you, I want to illustrate this. Go with me to Genesis 37. Genesis 37 and verse 36. I just want to demonstrate the interruption of chapter 38. So here we go, Genesis 37:36. The Midianites, meanwhile, sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, a courier of Pharaoh and his chief steward. Then you have the story of 38. Now listen to the way 39 begins. Verse 1. When Joseph was taken down to Egypt, a certain Egyptian, Potiphar, a courtier of Pharaoh and his chief steward, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. You see? So it talks about him being sold to Potiphar. Then it gets into the Judah story. And then 39 wants you to remember, okay, here's where we are. Joseph is in Egypt in the service of this particular Potiphar. Now, Joseph is advanced. Everything that Joseph does works out well for him. Everything that he touches turns good. He becomes the personal attendant of the Egyptian, Potiphar. He's given charge of his house, and he's given control over everything in the house. He's inside the house of this official. And the wife has a strong liking, to put it mildly, towards Joseph. She makes advances to him, but he refuses. And notice he refuses in a very righteous way. He says that it would be a sin against God for him to do this. Look, chances are no one would have known. He had every opportunity to be alone with this woman, but he chose to be upright in his actions, and he refused because she belonged to his boss. You know, the world would be a lot different if people thought like this. But he says, the man of the house has given me control of everything, but not you. So he tries to run out. She grabs his garment, and then fake news strikes. She then says he tried to rape her. Well, you can imagine the husband coming home. He's got this foreigner that he's trusted. She's got his garment. Once again, by the way, when Joseph, when there is a major shift in the narrative, a garment is involved. And so too it is here. Once again, someone else is holding his garment, and bad is reported about him. In the first, coat of many colors, the boys have it and say he's dead. In the second, the woman has it and says that he raped her or attempted to. In both cases, bad things happen to Yosef. Joseph is thrown into a pit once again. Once again, the continuity of the story is interrupted with a potential ruin of the plan. But that's only if you view it as a reader who doesn't see the behind the scenes, who doesn't understand that even in this, it's God's way of advancing him. Sometimes we have to go low to get high. This is the meaning of Yom Kippur, which is coming up. Yom Kippur is a time to make yourself low. You never reach God by making yourself high. You only connect with God by making yourself low. And so it is in the acting of this, call it a play. Joseph has to be brought low. He's in the pit. But there's an interesting phrase that occurs in chapter 39 3 times. Yehovah et Yosef. Jehovah was with Joseph. In the beginning of the story, when he was advanced, it said Jehovah was with Joseph. When he finds himself in prison, it says Jehovah was with Joseph. Jehovah et Yosef. Both, no matter what the circumstance, no matter what the situation, whether high or low, Jehovah was with Joseph. So he finds himself in jail. As we move into 40, and I'm going through a lot of material. I told you I was going to tell a story. So I want to work through the material because I want to establish some points that tie the ancient story of Joseph to the current, present, and prophetic story of Joseph. Joseph finds himself in prison, and during his incarceration, two others who also were officials find themselves in prison. The cupbearer and the baker of Pharaoh find themselves in jail with Joseph. And they have dreams. Joseph is perceptive. He's intuitive. He has insight, a spiritual gift, let's call it. That's what it is. It's from God. And when the boys, the cupbearer and the baker, get up one particular morning, Yosef notices their face is down, like something's bothering them. And he said, "What's wrong?" This story is in Genesis 40. And they both recount a dream that they had. And he interprets the dream. And he says to the cupbearer, "Your dream means that you'll be restored to your office." To the baker, the news is not so good. He says, "You'll be killed." Both dreams were interpreted correctly because God gave Joseph the meaning. And before the cupbearer left, Joseph told him, "Don't forget me. When you get out and you get restored, don't forget me." But guess what? He forgot him. Sometimes even your good deeds are forgotten. One of the things that I love about the story of Joseph is it tells us that in these situations, which sometimes appear to be bad or heavy or overwhelming or there's no way out, it's not your fault. Bad has happened, but it's not something you did that caused it. In this story, we're shown that at times, God's still with that person. Perhaps you're going through something right now. Maybe you feel there's no way out. Maybe you feel that it's not something you did and you're downtrodden about it. According to the biblical story, the Joseph Saga, perhaps you need to remember that Jehovah's still with you. And that's the story that is repeated over and over. The cupbearer gets out. He's restored to his place. Joseph has a dream, the Pharaoh has a dream, and he is looking for some help in interpreting the dream, but nobody can help him. The cupbearer remembers Joseph, finally. Now, notice it says in the story, chapter 41 begins after 2 years. 2 years. And he finally remembered. So he tells Pharaoh, there is this guy, I feel bad about it, but I forgot about him, but there is this guy that's in your jail who told me about my life, and Pharaoh said, go get him. Now then you have a Hebrew coming in the presence of the king of the known world, one of the most powerful personalities on earth at the time, and it reminds me of the story of Daniel where another Hebrew is involved in sharing the meaning of a dream with a world leader. Now, I just want to put as a footnote, don't think this won't happen again. I believe that this is stressed enough in the Hebrew Scriptures that there will be a time when descendants of these Hebrews will be used in key places. They may have to go through some bad times to be in the right position at the right time, but they will be used to interpret dreams which are given to world leaders, which will set the stage for events that are prophetic in nature, just like Scripture says here. Pharaoh's dreams have one meaning, a common meaning, and that is that a famine will follow plenty. There'll be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And Joseph has an idea as he presents the dream. He says, first of all, it's recorded that Joseph, with God's help, is able to interpret. It really stresses this. So with God's help, he's able to understand and interpret the dream, and he makes that known to Pharaoh. Now, in chapter 41, I want to go there. Go with me to chapter 41, verse 25. 41:25. Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 healthy cows are 7 years. The 7 healthy ears are 7 years. It's the same dream. The 7 lean and ugly cows that followed are 7 years, as are also the 7 empty ears scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I have told Pharaoh. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. Immediately ahead are 7 years of great abundance in all the land of Egypt. And after them will come 7 years of famine, and all the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten. As the land is ravaged by famine, no trace of the abundance will be left in the land because of the famine thereafter, for it will be very severe. As for Pharaoh, having had the same dream twice, it means that the matter has been determined by God and that God will soon cover it out. Accordingly, let Pharaoh find a man of discernment and wisdom and set him over the land of Egypt. This is Joseph telling him. And let Pharaoh take steps to appoint overseers over the land and organize the land of Egypt in the 7 years of plenty. Let all the food of the good years that are coming to be gathered, and let the grain be collected under Pharaoh's authority as food to be stored in the cities. Let that food be a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which will come upon the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish in the famine. Now, this is the story as it's related, that there is a famine that's coming. It was revealed to Pharaoh in a dream. Joseph interprets it. He even says that we have to come up with a plan to put aside food for this great time of famine because it will be very severe. He says you got to find somebody who can help. And then Pharaoh says,
verse 38, and Pharaoh said to his courtiers, could we find another like him, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there's none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my court, and by your command shall all my people be directed. Only with respect to the throne shall I be superior to you. And Pharaoh further said to Joseph, I put you in charge of all the land of Egypt. Removing his signet ring from his hand, Pharaoh put it on Joseph's hand and had him dressed in robes of fine linen, put a gold chain about his neck, had him ride in the chariot of his second in command, and they cried before him, Avrek. Thus he placed him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, yet without you no one shall lift up hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-paneah, and he gave him for a wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On. And thus Joseph emerged in charge of the land of Egypt. He was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Leaving Pharaoh's presence, Joseph traveled through all the land of Egypt. Beautiful story. From riches to rags, to riches to rags, to riches. Thus is the story of Joseph with one underlying theme. Jehovah is with Joseph. Jehovah is guiding the life of Joseph, and I can tell you, can you imagine at the low points, did Joseph know that Jehovah was with him? It's an interesting thought. Now, Joseph has two sons. During the time of plenty, look at verse 50 of chapter 41. Before the years of famine came, Joseph became the father of two sons, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, meaning, listen to this, God has made me forget completely my hardship in my parental home. And the second he named Ephraim, meaning God has made me fruitful or fertile in the land of my affliction. Interesting story. Joseph is married to a pagan priest daughter. He has children of her. Now, you know, if you look at the stories, Judah and Joseph are emerging in their own way, being prepared through the natural events of their life, the good and the bad, for a special meeting. A meeting that they don't even know is coming soon. Both have children. In both stories, there's the story of a ring. You have the ring in the signet and the story in Judah. You have the ring in the story of Joseph. There are similarities, and the scribe wants us to understand what it is that is going on. They want us to understand that there are similarities, that the two brothers who are coming together, their lives are mirrored in some ways in that they're both being prepared. And then famine strikes. Famine strikes so severely, but it's interesting that it takes the famine to bring about the reunion of all Israel. It is a famine that drives the boys together. In the years of plenty, there's no need for them to come together. There's nothing which demands one go to the other. Not in the years of plenty. But when famine strikes, the boys go to Egypt. Look at chapter 42, beginning in verse 1, Genesis 42. When Jacob saw that there were food rations to be had in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at each other? Now I hear," he went on, "that there are rations to be had in Egypt. Go down and procure rations for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to get grain rations in Egypt, for Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, since he feared that he might meet with disaster. Thus the sons of Israel were among those who came to procure rations, for the famine extended to the land of Canaan. This is a bad famine. It's reached the ends of the earth, at least in that part of the world, right? So the boys go, but not Benjamin. Now, when they approach Joseph, you've got to go through Joseph to get life. Key point. Look at verse 6. Joseph was the vizier of the land. It was he who dispensed rations to all the people of the land. Joseph's brothers came and bowed low to him with their faces to the ground. And Joseph saw his brothers. He recognized them, but he acted like a stranger toward them and spoke harshly to them. And he asked them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to procure food." Key point. Joseph recognizes his brothers, but they don't know him. And so it is in the current time. Joseph recognizes his brother, but his brother doesn't recognize him. He accuses them of spying. Notice how they respond, chapter 42, verse 10 and 11. And they said, "No, my Lord, truly your servants have come to procure food." We're not here to spy. "We are all of us sons of the same man. We're honest men. Your servants have never been spies." They're saying, "We're honest men," and he's thinking, yeah, right. And he said to them, "No, you've come to see the land and its nakedness." And they replied, "We, your servants, were 12 brothers, sons of a certain man in the land of Canaan. The youngest, however, is now with our father, and one is not. One is no more." Now he's hearing this. Imagine. He's seeing the truthfulness in their answer. He keeps applying pressure, though. He wants them to understand that we're gonna go through some trial here. And he tells them, "I don't believe you." I'm paraphrasing. He said, "It is just as I said, you're spies." So he comes up with this idea. Some say he's toying with them. I think he's literally putting them to the test to see. He's in a position of authority, but he wants to see if they have changed. He says, "One of you will be held by me. The rest of you are going to take provisions to the rest of your family, and then you're going to bring that youngest one back to me. The one you sick. You said you got another brother. I understand you not being able to bring the one that is not, but I want to see the youngest brother." Now notice they begin to make teshuvah. They begin to make repentance. Look at verse 21. They said to one another, now imagine they're talking. They think he's an Egyptian. He's got an interpreter between them. He's speaking Egyptian. He's saying, "It's like I said, they're spies." And then the interpreter tells them in Hebrew, "You're spies." And they're saying, "No, we're not." And he said, "They said," you see there's an interpreter. They don't know he understands them, but he does. Here's what they say. "Alas, we're being punished on account of our brother. because we looked on at his anguish, yet paid no heed as he pleaded with us. That's why this distress has come upon us. Then Reuben spoke up and said, I told you, do no wrong to the boy, but you didn't pay attention. Now comes the reckoning for his blood. Joseph hears all this. Now he's feeling like, hey, now they're getting it, right? In verse 23, they didn't know that Joseph understood, for there was an interpreter between him and them. So the story continues. I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. Simeon stays, and Joseph has their money put back in their sacks. So they get down the road, they stop, and they realize that they've got the money in their sack. When they get to their father, verse 29 and following, they relate the story about the Lord of the land. We saw him, he thought we were spies. He said, we've got to bring back the youngest one. Remember, Jacob is upset. He's like, why would you tell the guy that you even had another boy? What? Who did that? I mean, he's but beyond him. He can't believe these idiots did this. He is totally, because now he thinks another one, now you've got it. So he tries to put this on the, he doesn't, you know, if you read the story, he seems to be one, I'm just not going to face this right now. We've got food for right now. And then as it starts running low, he says, go back. And the boys say, look, we can't go back and show our face without bringing Benjamin. Simeon is still locked up, by the way, right? So when they decide, and Judah actually tells his father, we could have been there and back, you know, if you would have just let us go when we told you this story. Reuben volunteers. He basically, look down at chapter 42, verse 36. Their father Jacob said to them, it's always me that you bereave. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And now you would take away Benjamin? These things always happen to me. Sort of a fluid translation, but you get the point. This is the nature of the text. Now look at verse 37. Reuben said to his father, you may kill my two sons if I don't bring him back to you. Put him in my care and I'll return him to you. Now, do you think Jacob trusts Reuben? He can't trust him with his women, and he doesn't trust him with his son. Under his watch, bad things have happened. Jacob will later refer to Reuben as the one who is unstable like water. Just, you're not the right one. Now notice verse 38. My son must not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left. If he meets with disaster on the journey you're taking, you'll send my white head down to Sheol in grief. But the famine gets worse. And he's already said, Reuben, you're not going to be the one. So Judah steps forward. Now, in chapter 43, look at verse 8. Then Judah said to his father Israel, send the boy in my care, and let us be on our way that we may live and not die, you and we and our children. I myself will be surety for him. You may hold me responsible. If I don't bring him back to you and set him before you, I will stand guilty before you forever. For we could have been back there twice if we had not dawdled. Jacob lets him do it. And I believe it's because he knows that Judah knows what it's like to be bereaved of sons. Had Judah not gone through that, you see, Reuben said, you can kill my boys. But that doesn't mean as much as someone who's already lost two sons.
saying, hold me responsible, Dad. It's like, I know what it's like to lose a child. He's been conditioned through the rigors of a grievous life event twice. And Jacob trusts him. The father agrees. The reunion takes place. The boys come back and all of them are together. Only the father is absent. When the reunion begins, we're going to look at a lot of prophetic texts. The family will come together. The events are orchestrated by God, but the father comes in at a later stage in the story, just as it happens in the Joseph saga. They all come together. Joseph, in chapter 43, verse 27, asks about his father. You begin to see something emerge in the story which is going to carry it through, bringing about this very intimate meeting. He asks about his father. His heart yearns for his father. Now he sees Benjamin. And when he sees Benjamin, he's so overcome with emotion that he runs out of the room, cries, gets control of himself, and comes back in. And then he seats the boys according to their age. And they were a bit astonished at this. I think Joseph is going to demonstrate some intimate family knowledge that's going to astonish his brother, and it will too be part of the coming together. But that comes later. In verse 23 of 44, let me back up just a second. After this meal, he once again sends the boys, but this time he takes Joseph. Joseph gets his cup, his goblet, a silver drinking cup, which we later learn has something to do with divining, and he puts that in Benjamin's bag. The boys leave, and then Joseph says, go chase them down. Check the bags. To their astonishment, they find a stolen cup in one of the bags. But before it's pulled out, the boys say, look, we didn't take anything. You remember how it unfolds. They say, we didn't take, and they say, here's the deal. If you find your cup in our stuff, you kill whoever's got it. Now, he knows it's Benjamin's bag. And back then, a word meant something. So he said, no. And they said, you can even put the rest of us in slavery. They're so sure they didn't steal the cup. He said, only the one in whose bag I find it will be my slave. The rest of you can go free. Can you imagine when that cup comes out of Benjamin's bag? Oh my God. And this drives the reunion. In Hebrew it says, Vayigash, and Judah drew near. Now this is, Judah steps forward to this man who is the second over Egypt. I can imagine that people actually turned their spears as he walked up. It doesn't say that. I can just imagine that. If I were doing a movie, I would do it that way. He approaches, and in his ear, he begins to relate that we cannot. You don't understand. Listen to this. Listen to what he says. Judah, verse 18 of 44. Then Judah went up to him and said, please, my Lord, let your servant appeal to my Lord. Don't be impatient with your servant,
who are the equal of Pharaoh, my Lord asked his servants, have you a father or another brother? We told my Lord, we have an old father, and there is a child of his old age, the youngest. His full brother is dead. Look how close he is to Joseph. So that he alone is left of his mother, and his father dotes on him. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me that I may set eyes on him. We said to my Lord, the boy can't leave his father. If he were to leave him, his father would die. But you said to your servant, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, do not let me see your faces. When we came back to your servant, my father, we reported the Lord's words to him. Later, our father said, go back and procure food for us. We said, we can't go down. Only if our younger brother is with us can we go down, for we may not show our faces to the men unless our youngest brother is with us. Your servant, my father, said to us, as you know, my wife bore me 2 sons. One is gone from me. And I said, alas, he was torn by a beast. I have not seen him, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and he meets with the disaster, you will send my white head down to Sheol in sorrow. And he goes on and he says, if I come to your servant, my father, and that boy's not with us, the man's going to die. My father will die. Therefore, please let your servant remain as slave, so that, for how can I go back to my father unless the boy is with me? Let me not be witness to the woe that would overtake my father. Gripping. Judah says, take me. Let the boy go back. Now, if you can read this and not be moved, it's an amazing story. Judah drew near and put himself in a position of servitude to save his father. Interestingly enough, the word father occurs 14 times in this text. 14 times in the narrative. The focus is on one thing. When Joseph realizes that everything is on the mend, he tells get everybody out of here. He breaks down and he says, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph, your brother. This drove the reunion one thing. Care for the father. You know what Joseph says immediately after he gets himself together? How's my father? Judah is all about the only thing that matters in this is my father. Joseph said, the only thing that matters is my father. And then he says in chapter 45, Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants. He cried out, have everyone withdraw from me, so that no one was left but his brothers when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. His sobs were so loud that the Egyptians could hear, and so the news reached Pharaoh's palace. Joseph said to his brothers, Ani Yosef, is my father still well? His brothers couldn't answer him. Remember earlier in the story it says brothers couldn't speak peace to him? Now they can't answer him for a different reason. Imagine. Verse 4, then Joseph said to his brothers, come forward to me. They came forward. He said, I am your brother Joseph, he whom you sold into Egypt. Now, do not be distressed or reproach yourself because you sold me here. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you. It's now 2 years that there has been famine in the land, and there are still 5 years to come in which there shall be no yield for tilling. Listen, God sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival on earth and to save your lives in an extraordinary deliverance. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, Lord of all his household, and ruler over the land of Egypt. Now hurry, go back to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord over all of Egypt. Come down without delay. And he says, you're going to live in the choicest of lands. Beautiful story. I believe that the Joseph Saga provides clues for us to help understand the prophetic scenario that will be brought about over the course of time. Joseph was exiled into a land not his. As he put it, God sent me here. Remember in the story when the children of Israel, when the northern tribes are taken into captivity, we read from the beginning, this thing is from God. It has to happen. Part of Jehovah's plan to preserve life, even though not understood totally by those who were scattered, it had to be. Because Joseph is going to be in a position to save lives. Joseph he had to be exiled. He had to be thought of as Anenu, as he is not. Had to be forgotten. He even names his children to indicate that he's been forgotten, but he's fruitful. So it is today. Judah's suffering historically, and even into the modern world that we live in, Judah's suffering is going to be used in a positive way to condition Judah for the reunion that is coming. Believe me, it's part of the plan. Famine seems to be the catalyst in all of this. I know you know these passages, but in Amos chapter 8, verse 11, a time is coming, declares my Lord God, when I will send a famine upon the land, not a hunger of bread or a thirst for water, but for hearing the words of Jehovah. Men shall wander from sea to sea, from north to east to seek the word of the Lord, but they shall not find it. Listen to me. I'm going to tell you something. Joseph has Jehovah's word. I'm telling you that Joseph is going to be instrumental in feeding the people the word. Currently, many people on earth today are being fed things which cannot sustain them in famine. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word which comes forth from the mouth of Jehovah. What Joseph is going to bring about in the latter days is a revival that will bring life through the word. The famine that the world is facing is not a famine of bread and water according to Amos 8:11, but of hearing the words of Jehovah. That's what's going to solve the famine. When the brothers meet again, recognition is only one way. Joseph recognizes them, they don't recognize him, and so it is today. Joseph's familiarity with intimate knowledge of the family was demonstrated when he seated them according to their age order. This was a surprise to them. So too will Joseph be familiar with the ways of his brother in the latter days. It is happening now. Ultimately, Judah will draw near to Joseph out of love and concern for the father. And only in the right time
will Joseph reveal himself to his brothers. Only in the right time. Vayigash, Judah has to draw near first. When Judah draws near, and that's not happening yet, Joseph, who's unrecognized, only then will he say, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. And the results of that reunion will astound the world. Next week, we're going to go further into the narrative. And as we cover these ancient stories, we will do everything we can to bring together the ancient stories and the prophetic text to which they are associated with. For now, the boys are going back to the father with a revelation that Joseph is alive. Shabbat Shalom. Now I'll take a few minute break and we'll come back and do a dialogue, so don't go away.